This is Mr. Sterling. There is a specific and painful experience that a lot of genuinely kind men live through more than once before they understand what is actually happening inside it. He meets a woman. He treats her well, consistently, without games, without manufactured distance, without the manipulative unpredictability that some other men use deliberately. And somewhere along the way, instead of deepening respect and appreciation, something else happens. She grows distant. She takes him for granted. She seems to respect him less the more consistently good he is to her. And more of the men she seems genuinely drawn to are the ones who treat her with far less care than he does. He walks away from this concluding that kindness itself is the problem, that being a good man is somehow a liability. That is the wrong lesson, and I want to spend this video correcting it, because the actual mechanism at work here has almost nothing to do with kindness being unattractive, and everything to do with a specific and well-documented psychological pattern that has nothing to do with gender at all. Here is the framework that explains everything else in this video. A person's internal sense of their own worth acts like a thermostat. It does not just describe how they feel about themselves. It actively works to keep their circumstances consistent with that internal setting. The same way a thermostat does not just report the temperature, it actively adjusts the room to match whatever it was set to. A person whose internal thermostat is set low will often, without fully realizing it, feel a strange discomfort around treatment that exceeds what that internal setting expects, and will unconsciously act in ways that bring the external situation back down to match the internal setting they are actually comfortable with. This is not a female pattern. It is a human one, observed consistently in psychological research across every population studied, and it explains a huge amount of what looks, from the outside, like someone inexplicably rejecting good treatment in favor of worse treatment. 1. What is actually happening inside a person whose internal thermostat is set low? A person with a low internal sense of their own worth has, usually across years of specific experiences, developed a working model of what they believe they are entitled to receive from other people. This model was not chosen consciously. It was built, often in childhood or through a series of formative relationships, out of whatever treatment was consistently available to them. If the consistent experience was inattention, criticism, or conditional affection, the internal model calibrates to that as the expected baseline, the emotional equivalent of normal room temperature. When that person then encounters consistent, unconditional kindness, something genuinely uncomfortable happens internally, even though the kindness itself is exactly what any healthy person would want. The kindness does not match the internal model. It creates a kind of dissonance, a felt sense that something does not add up, and the mind, uncomfortable with that mismatch, starts looking for an explanation that restores consistency. The explanation it frequently lands on is not, "I am worth this, after all." It is far more often something must be wrong with the person offering it, because that conclusion, however painful, at least restores internal consistency without requiring the much harder work of revising a deeply held belief about one's own worth. 2. Why this produces exactly the specific behavior pattern good men keep running into. Call him Elliot, 36, an architect who spent 4 years in a relationship that followed this exact shape twice with 2 different women before he finally understood what was actually happening. Elliot is, by any honest description, an easy man to be with. He is attentive without being suffocating. He remembers what matters to the people he loves. He shows up reliably, communicates directly, and does not use manufactured distance or manipulation to generate interest, because he has never needed to. Both relationships followed an identical arc. Early on, his consistency and warmth were received with what looked like genuine appreciation. Somewhere around month 4 or 5, something shifted. Small tests started appearing, minor provocations that seemed designed less to communicate an actual need and more to see whether his warmth would survive being pushed against. When it did survive, when Elliot remained steady and kind regardless, the respect he was hoping that steadiness would earn did not increase. It decreased. Both women, independently, began describing him in ways that suggested his consistency read to them not as strength, but as a kind of weakness, an absence of the friction they had apparently come to associate, unconsciously, with genuine investment. Elliot spent a long time believing the lesson here was that he needed to be less available, less consistent, more strategically withholding. That is the wrong lesson, and it is worth being precise about why. 3. This is the climax of the entire mechanism, and it deserves to be understood clearly rather than simplified into cynicism. What she is actually testing, often without fully knowing she is doing it, is not whether he is weak. It is whether his kindness is conditional, the way every other kindness she has previously experienced turned out to be. A person whose internal model of relationships was built on inconsistent or conditional care has learned, through real and often painful experience, that warmth tends to disappear the moment it is inconvenient, tested, or unrewarded. When she encounters a man whose kindness appears unconditional, the deepest and most honest question she is actually asking, underneath behavior that looks like disrespect or provocation from the outside, is this real, or will it collapse the way everything else did the moment I stop performing gratitude for it? The pushing, the testing, the apparent ingratitude is frequently not contempt for his kindness. It is an unconscious attempt to find the edge of it, to discover whether it is durable or whether, like everything else she has experienced, it was actually conditional on her continuing to behave in a way that earned it. This reframe matters enormously because it changes what the correct response actually is. The instinct many men develop to become less kind, more withholding, more strategically distant in response to this pattern often confirms the exact fear driving the behavior. It proves her internal model correct. His kindness was conditional after all, and the moment she stopped performing gratitude for it, it disappeared. That confirmation deepens the pattern rather than resolving it. 4. Why simply being consistently kind without responding to disrespect is not the actual answer either. I want to be precise here, because there is a version of this conversation that lands in exactly the wrong place, telling men to simply absorb disrespect indefinitely, because it is secretly a test they need to pass through sheer endurance. That is not correct, and it produces exactly the outcome described in episode 13 of this channel, a man whose unconditional patience, without any accompanying standard, teaches the other person that poor treatment carries no cost at all. The answer is not indefinite absorption. It is something more precise, remaining genuinely warm and consistent in his actual character, while also being direct and honest, calmly and without punishment, about behavior that crosses a real line. This combination, consistency of character alongside a real standard for how he expects to be treated, is what actually resolves the internal test, because it demonstrates something her previous experience never taught her was possible. That kindness and self-respect can coexist in the same person, that warmth does not require weakness, and that a real standard does not require withdrawing the underlying care. 5. What actually changes the pattern, and why it requires more than just being nice. The version of Elliot who eventually broke this cycle with a later partner did something specific and different from what he had done in his previous 2 relationships. When testing behavior appeared, he did not become colder or more withholding, and he did not simply absorb it silently either. He named it directly, calmly, and without accusation. I noticed you have been testing whether I actually mean it when I am kind to you. I do mean it. And I also need you to know that being tested repeatedly is not something I am willing to accept indefinitely, because it is not fair to either of us. That combination, explicit acknowledgement of what was happening, reassurance that the kindness was genuine, and a clear boundary against the testing continuing indefinitely, did something that simple, unconditional patience never could. It gave her actual, direct evidence that his warmth was not conditional on her behavior, while simultaneously demonstrating that he had enough self-respect not to be endlessly tested. Both pieces were necessary. Either one alone would have left the pattern intact. 6. Why this matters for how a man should read the entire situation going forward. If you are a genuinely kind man and you keep running into this exact pattern, the honest diagnosis is almost never that your kindness is the problem. It is far more often that you have been selecting for or attracting partners whose internal model of relationships was built on conditional care, and your consistency, rather than being received as the gift it actually is triggering a test born out of a reasonable, if painful, history of disappointment. Understanding this changes the response available to you. Instead of concluding that kindness itself needs to be abandoned, you can hold both things simultaneously that actually resolve the pattern. Genuine, unwavering warmth as your actual character, paired with a clear, calmly stated standard for how you expect to be treated, communicated directly rather than through manufactured distance or withdrawal. 7. The honest conclusion, because balance matters here more than a tidy ending. Not every woman who seems to take a kind man for granted is running this specific pattern, and not every relationship that struggles in this way will resolve simply because he communicates more directly. Some patterns are deep enough, and some people are far enough from doing the internal work required that no amount of clear communication from a partner will change the underlying dynamic. That is real, and it is worth naming honestly rather than promising every situation like this has a guaranteed resolution. But for the men who are watching this and recognizing a genuine pattern rather than a fixed one, the actual answer was never to become less kind. It was to become more clear, communicating openly both that the kindness is real and unconditional, and that it is paired with a genuine standard for how he expects to be treated in return. I want to hear from you directly. If you have lived through this exact pattern, being consistently kind and watching that kindness seem to earn less respect rather than more, tell me what you tried, what worked, and what did not. Real experience here is worth more than any framework I can offer from outside it. Put it in the comments. This is Mr. Sterling.